Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to talk this week a little bit about fire. The Chumash tells us that Moshe, at the beginning of this week's parsha, gathers the people and again teaches them about the Shabbat. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. But what's unique in this week's parsha is that we have the introduction of one of the prime milachot, one of the prime types of work that's prohibited on Shabbat. The pasuk states, "Lo tivaru eish bechomo shavotechem biyom haShabbat." You shall not burn, you shall not kindle any fire in all of your dwellings on the day of Shabbat. And while the rabbis, while Chazal offer tons of explanations about what's so unique about this mitzvah, what's so unique about the action of lighting, that it needs to be singled out amongst the types of work that one is supposed to refrain from on Shabbat, I wanted to pick up on one literary connection that I think brings us to a question of what's the nature of Shabbat. This phrase of lo tevarun eish, you shall not kindle a fire, the shorashim of bo'er and eish, of lighting and fire, only show up one other time before this in the Torah. And that's when Moshe arrives on the mountaintop with the sneh, with the burning bush at the very beginning of his journey. The Torah says, "V'hinei hasneh bo'er ve'einenu chal," that this bush was burning, but it was not being consumed. And what we realize, that this moment where Moshe comes face to face with God for the first time, where Moshe begins his conversation with God, that all gets manifested in this eish that is bo'er, this sneh that is bo'er be'esh, a bush that is being kindled with fire. And fire, from that point on, comes to signify God's presence. There's the fire that leads them in the desert, that protects them from the Egyptians. There's the fire on the top of Har Sinai. It all harkens back to this original fire, bo'er be'esh. And the Torah is telling us something so powerful and beautiful in this week's parsha, when it says, you don't need to have that fire in order to have Shabbat and in order to feel the presence of God. So much of Sefer Shemot is about the Jewish people reckoning with God as fire, God as the destructor, the punisher of Egypt, God as the fiery flame above Har Sinai. And the power of saying that you can have Shabbat, you can have God, even without that fire, even without that intensely felt heat, warmth, presence that's evoked by fire, you can still have a Shabbat. You can still have a feeling and a connection with the divine. But it's not one that comes through that intense presence, but rather one that comes through absence, one that comes through resting, one that comes through stepping back, one that comes through not work, but a lack of work, a lack of fire. It's this powerful metaphor to say that on the Shabbat, we're not going to have fire. We're not going to be dependent on presence in the same way. We're rather going to achieve presence through absence. We're going to find the gaps, the spaces where there isn't fire, and say, there's God here too. This is our Shabbat.